appreciated. The executive branch is exceeding their authority currently. The judiciary has been exceeding their authority for some time. Both of those infringed on the legislative authority. My concern is that, especially with the executive branch, that'll work itself out at the election time. The judiciary doesn't work itself out quite so well or as quickly. They're really gumming up the military when judges exceed their federal authority. And my suggestion is, when a judge, every regulating entity operates within a scope of authority. If you go to Janesville and you get a parking ticket from the city of Madison parking agent, can they write you nasty letters and haul you into court? Yes, they can. Can they hold you in contempt of court? Perhaps. Can they, when it gets there, it will be thrown out. So you have no authority to write tickets in this, you city of Madison employee have no authority to write tickets in the city of Janesville. When a federal judge issues a ruling which exceeds the scope of their authority, are we not at a point where we ignore that and let them cite us for contempt, and that'll get thrown out because they've exceeded their authority? Yeah. Judges that exceed their authority need to be ignored, and that takes some spine to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, so we are in the midst of a big civics lesson in America right now. His question was about executive authorities and judicial overreach, and are we not witnessing these two branches of government exceeding their authority? And your question is, what can we do about it? And can't we do something about it, right?
My suggestion, and even beyond that, my suggestion is when a judge issues something that exceeds their authority, ignore it.
Right, so his point is, when a judge does something that exceeds his authority, ignore it. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your life, but you're at a point that you're touching on a point that I really agree with, which is the founders created a beautiful system, and the system they created was to not invest all the power into one person or one entity, but to divide the power into three different branches of government, three separate but equal branches of government, and to have these separation of powers so that each branch would check the other, so that you would have this kind of tension to restrain power, to reserve power for people in the states, respectively. And that was the whole beautiful construct of the Constitution. And we believe, in the House, that these other branches are testing their limits and exceeding their limits. So let me talk about the executive branch for a second. We think President Obama has issued some regulations and executive orders that exceed his authority because we believe they go outside the boundaries of the law that are supposed to confine what he can do. Executive orders, by definition, aren't wrong or unconstitutional, so long as they are in the job description of the executive branch of implementing and enforcing the law, and within the law, no problem. But Congress is tasked with the job of writing laws. Congress writes laws. Presidents don't write laws. Presidents enforce and implement laws. The judiciary interprets the laws. And no one branch has superiority over the other. These are equal branches. And so we believe that some of these executive orders that the President has put out, particularly in health care, exceed the intent and letter of the law. And so we have a real problem with that. What have we done about it? Well, there are two things that we did last week, a couple bills, and another bill we passed a number of weeks ago. Number one, the REINS Act is a bill we've passed that says for a rule or regulation coming out of the executive branch that's substantial, meaning more than $50 million in costs imposed on the economy, that is basically a law. And that should come back to Congress for a final vote and approval before it becomes effective. A lot of state legislatures do this already. So what we're basically saying is Congress will write kind of a vague law, health care. And then the executive branch comes up with regulations to implement that law, complete with fines and penalties and rules and basically things that have the full force of law. And what we're saying is that really is inherently a legislative function, and therefore those rules should come back to Congress for a final approval or an amendment before they become effective, so that we can guarantee that the law writers have the final say-so, so that these rules jive with the original intent of the law that the law writers intended. We think that that restores accountability and restores the balance of power. That's point number one. Point number two is we don't have standing, according to many, right now when we see the president exceeding this authority. So we believe that we ought to be able to go to court and say this branch of government is contesting that the executive branch of government has exceeded its authority and is now rewriting laws on its own without going through Congress. That's what we think some of these healthcare regulatory changes have done. And so we think we should litigate that, but the argument is we don't have standing. So we passed a bill last week to establish legislative standing so that we can go do that, can go to court and litigate this. On the judiciary front, again, each branch tests its boundaries, and I do think there have been clearly cases of judiciary overreach. The thing that I'm more concerned about right now with the judiciary is this new rule that the Senate put in place that says instead of having bipartisan appointees, 60 votes for judges, Harry Reid just did this, they call it the nuclear option, it's just 50 votes plus one. 51 votes, meaning you can have partisan nominees that don't have bipartisan support that can get put on the bench. So I think they're going to stack the courts and the regulatory agencies because of this new rule that they passed. And I think you'll have more judges who are less constructionists and more legislators. Legislating from the bench is what we typically call this. And legislating from the bench is not what the judiciary's job is to do. Their job is to determine the constitutionality of bills and determine whether bills conform with the statute. It's the legislature's job to write these laws. And so we do believe that the law-writing authority has been taken over in some instances by both other branches of government, and we're taking moves to try and bring that back together and rebalance the balance of powers as it was originally intended. Here's the problem with all of this. You got to pass a bill to do it. We can pass it out of the House. Guess what? We're having a hard time passing this out of the Senate right now, let alone having the president sign something in law. And so that's sort of the conundrum and the conflict we have right now. I agree with that, and I think, look, the Constitution was written for all times, and